Beacon Press Audio presents Lieutenant Nun, the true story of a cross-dressing transatlantic adventurer who escaped from a Spanish convent in 1599 and lived as a man, by Catalina de Erauso. Translated from the Spanish by Michelle Steptoe and Gabriel Steptoe. This audiobook is narrated by Adriana Pascua, published by Beacon Press Audio 2024.
Forward. The Marvel of Peru. Another world was searched through oceans new to find the marvel of Peru, and yet these rarities might be allowed to man, that sovereign thing and proud. Had he not dealt between the bark and tree, forbidden mixtures there to see. Andrew Marvell, The Mower Against Gardens, 1681. How can we assess the erotic, social, and political effects of cross-dressing at a remove of almost 4 centuries, in the context of a culture very different from our own and as described in a Spanish-language text? The short answer, of course, is that we can't. In the fascinating and fantastic adventures of the lieutenant nun Doña Catalina de Erauso, who cross-dressed her way out of a Spanish convent and into the New World, what we read, what we find, is a version of ourselves. When Catalina de Erauso fights duels, steals money, leads soldiers into battle, rescues a woman in distress, evades the marriage plans of hopeful widows and their daughters, and marches across league upon league of uncharted Peruvian terrain, it is tempting to see in her tale an allegory of early modern women's emergent subjectivity. When, acting as a second for a friend whose honor has been insulted, she kills her brother unknowingly and inadvertently, it seems possible to see her as a version of Shakespeare's Viola in Twelfth Night, stepping into the shoes and the clothing of the brother she believes is dead. It is a happy coincidence that her hometown in Spain is San Sebastián, the name of Viola's lost brother. When Catalina flirts with 2 young women, frolicking and teasing, it might seem intriguing to read this as lesbianism avant la lettre, an instance of female homosexuality or, at the very least, love play between women. Yet all these readings are allegorical, that is to say, they are readings of her story as a story about something else, readings that offer her life, as indeed saints and others' lives have been offered, in the literary annals of her time and ours, as exemple, as indications of deeper or higher truths. Such modern readings are no more allegorical, it is perhaps needless to say, than the readings offered within the text itself, the search for the king on Holy Thursday that culminates in his discovery on Easter, the revelation that after all her adventuring and horseback riding, the lieutenant nun remains Virgo intacta, the close calls, or clothes calls, or close shaves, in which she encounters first her father, then her mother, shortly after her cross-dressed flight from the confines of the convent, and neither parent recognizes her. She is already someone else. As a story about emergent subjectivity, male or female, early modern or postmodern, Catalina de Erauso's narrative is a literal description of self-fashioning, in which, quite literally, clothes make the man. We may ourselves mistake subject for object, or discourse for subjectivity, when we regard Catalina's self as stable, and her costumes and roles as shifting. One thing that is very striking about this memoir is the materiality of clothing and its value. Recall that this is a time period far removed from the mass production of garments and the availability of ready-to-wear. Clothing was wealth and even identity. Actors in the theater wore noblemen's hand-me-downs and were criticized for social climbing, a transvestism of rank or status as well as of gender. Catalina's payment from benefactors and employers is frequently a suit of clothes, and she describes these gifts with distinct pleasure and gratitude. They help to transform her, again quite literally, into another person, with a new status as well as a new gender. Clothes offer sensuous pleasure, wealth, status, and social roles. Leaving the convent, Catalina says she shook off my veil and spent 3 days and nights, the Christological intervals perhaps not inadvertent, remaking herself anew, cutting a pair of breeches from her blue woolen bodice, a doublet and hose from her green petticoat. Not long after this transformation, she describes herself finding work as a page and resembling a well-dressed young bachelor. Pages are often described in Renaissance literature as beautiful young boys who looked, almost, like girls, and could be regarded as sexual partners for men as well as women. Malvolio in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night correctly reads Viola's femininity when she is dressed as the boy Cesario, though he doesn't realize what he sees. A male page in The Taming of the Shrew is dressed in women's clothes and pretends to be the wife of the drunken tinker, Christopher Sly. The fantastical Spaniard Don Armado in Love's Labour's Lost rehearses his love discourse with a page in the court of Navarre. In The Forest of Arden, Rosalind chooses as her alias no worse a name than Jove's own page, As You Like It, 1.3.124, and the name she adopts is Ganymede, a slang term in the period for boy lover or male prostitute. Since on the English public stage during the Renaissance, female parts were played by boy actors, a complex eroticism attends these impersonations. Rosalind as Ganymede at the height of the plot's foolery is a boy actor playing a girl, playing a boy, playing a girl. "Madam, undress you, and come now to bed," says Christopher Sly to the page he thinks is his wife, only reluctantly agreeing, at the last minute, to substitute a stage play for immediate love play, in despite of the flesh and the blood. In the real-life situations of Renaissance courtesans and prostitutes who, for example in Venice, often dressed as boys, the frisson of gender undecidability might be reserved, with provocative results for the flesh and the blood. "You talk like a fairy lady and act like a page boy," wrote the 16th century author Pietro Aretino, approvingly to a courtesan in the Italian town of Pistoia. Masculine clothing was stylish not only in Renaissance Italy, but also in England and in France, where in the 16th century no less a personage than Marguerite de Navarre was described as both handsomely and bewilderingly attired. You cannot tell whether she is male or female. She could just as well be a charming boy as the beautiful lady that she is. In a later time period equally titillated by gender crossover, Lady Caroline Lamb sat for her portrait in the costume of a page, and appeared in that guise at the door of her lover, the romantic poet Lord Byron. He was a fair-faced, delicate boy of 13 or 14 years old, whom one might have taken for the lady herself, a visitor reported of the cheeky young page. In an instant of literature accompanying if not imitating life, Byron's poem Lara centers on a male page who is revealed to be a girl, with a hand so femininely white it might bespeak another sex. The cultural and erotic fascination with pages, their borderline genders and sexualities, together with the literary and sexual fantasy of turning the page, continued on through the early 20th century. In the 1920s, lesbian poet Renee Vivian, dressed as a page, posed for a photograph with her lover, Natalie Barney. Page boy haircuts were the standard feminine style for conventional women in the 1950s, the same period that favored so-called little boy leg styles on women's tailored bathing suits. Where the page was once a young man who could be taken for a young woman, she had become, by the early part of this century, a young woman who resembled an elegant if somewhat anachronistic young man. But in the Catholic Spain of the 17th century, the cross-dressed woman might have other valences and associations besides, or instead of, erotic ones. While England banned women from the stage, permitted transvestite actors, and feared that cross-dressing might provoke homosexual desire, Spain allowed women on the stage, rejected the use of transvestite boy players, and punished homosexuality with death. Female cross-dressing seems to have been viewed with particular concern, since it was banned a number of times.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?